Kayla stood still at the edge of the ruined forest. Her eyes glowed a soft blue. That glow always meant danger. Her kind, the Varellans, were born with this gift. It had saved her more times than she could count. If her eyes turned blue, something bad was near. If they stayed normal, she was safe. Simple, clear, no lies, but today, something felt off. The trees whispered, the ground cracked, but her eyes stayed dim. Nothing glowed, no warning, still. Her heart beat fast in her chest. Something was watching her. She could feel it, but her eyes said nothing. She stepped carefully over broken metal pieces. Old war machines lay half buried in dirt. Smoke still rose from some piles leftovers of a long-forgotten fight between humans and aliens. Kayla didn't care who started it. She just needed to cross the dead zone and reach the mountains, far from everyone, far from the hunts, far from the humans. That's when she saw him, a human, sitting alone in a broken shelter made of scrap metal and wires. He looked busy, tapping something, his fingers fast. She stopped walking, eyes locked on him, still no glow, nothing. Her eyes stayed normal. She tilted her head, confused. Even being near humans usually made her glow faintly. Humans were dangerous. All Varellans knew that. Why was her gift silent now? The man looked up. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't shout. He just blinked and said, "Didn't think anyone else was alive around here." His voice was calm, not scared, not angry. Kayla didn't answer. She stayed quiet. She was trained to speak only when needed. Instead, she watched him closely, trying to feel any danger. "Still no glow. You don't look like a raider," he said again, standing up slowly. He raised both hands to show he wasn't holding anything. "I'm Darren, just fixing comms." Kayla didn't move. Her fingers hovered near the blade on her belt, but something told her not to draw it. And strangely, that something wasn't her glowing eyes. It was just a feeling. He turned around, walked back to his device, and sat again. He didn't seem scared of her at all. She took a step closer, eyes fixed on him. Still nothing. No glow, no warning, no danger. "I have a water filter," he said without looking. "If you're thirsty." Kayla didn't answer, but her eyes moved to a small metal jug near his feet. Clean water was rare here. That alone could be a trap. Still, her eyes stayed normal. She stepped closer, now only 5 feet away from him. Still, nothing. Was her power broken? Suddenly, a sharp sound cut through the air, a low growl, coming from behind the shelter. Kayla spun, drawing her blade. Her eyes lit up instantly blue and bright. A shadow moved behind the wreckage, fast and low. "Crawler," Darren muttered, jumping to his feet. Kayla rushed forward, blade ready. The crawler, a 4-legged beast with sharp limbs, leaped at them. Darren grabbed a nearby rod and hit it mid-air. Knocking it sideways, Kayla slashed at its side, cutting deep. The crawler screamed, rolled, and fled into the smoke. Kayla breathed hard, her eyes slowly dimming again. She turned to Darren, blade still in hand. He was bleeding from his arm, but didn't seem worried. "You all right?" he asked her. She nodded once. "That thing's been hunting around here for days," he said, tying a cloth around his wound. "Strange you didn't glow before it attacked." Her eyes narrowed. He knew about Varellan glow. He wasn't just some lost human. He knew too much. "Why didn't I glow when I saw you?" she asked quietly. Darren looked at her with curious eyes. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe I'm not dangerous." That didn't make sense. Everyone was dangerous, even other Varellans, but he wasn't. Or maybe her power had never been tested like this before. "I should leave," she said, stepping back. "Suit yourself," Darren shrugged. "But if more crawlers show up, you might want someone who knows how to swing a rod." Kayla paused. She looked at him again. Still nothing. Her eyes remained normal. She turned and walked back into the smoke. But deep inside, something had changed. Her power had never lied to her before. But now, after meeting him, she wasn't so sure anymore. The sun had nearly vanished behind the broken hills when Kayla heard the sound again. A low growl, deeper this time, echoing across the dead zone. She gripped her blade tighter and stepped back into the clearing where Darren sat. He looked up from his device and raised an eyebrow. "I thought you left," he said calmly, wiping grease from his hands. She didn't answer, just stood silently with her glowing blue eyes. Behind her, the shadows moved again. More crawlers. This time not just one. She could sense 3, maybe 4, circling from different sides. They were hunting as a pack. Her gift burned bright in her eyes. Danger was near, very near. "You feel it too, huh?" Darren said, standing up and pulling out a long rod made of strange metal. "I set up traps, but they might not be enough if they charge at once." Kayla had fought before, many times, but never like this. She should have run. That was what she'd always done when things turned bad. But her legs didn't move. She stayed, staring at him, wondering why he wasn't afraid. Why wasn't he glowing in her vision, like the others she had seen before danger struck? The first crawler leapt from the smoke, fangs wide, claws sharp. Darren spun and struck it midair with the rod. A shockwave burst from the impact. The beast fell to the ground twitching, stunned. Kayla had never seen that kind of weapon. The rod wasn't just metal. It hummed with energy, alive somehow. 2 more crawlers emerged. One from the right, another from behind her. Kayla jumped, spinning midair, slicing at both with fast strikes. Her blade tore through one's leg, but the other snapped its jaws toward her head. Darren grabbed her shoulder and pulled her down just in time. The beast flew past them and slammed into a fallen beam. "Are you all right?" he asked quickly, eyes sharp, voice steady. She nodded without speaking. Breathing hard, another growl, louder than the rest, came from the far side of the shelter. It wasn't a crawler this time. It was something bigger. Kayla's eyes flared like fire, glowing so bright they lit up the ruins. The ground shook as a massive armored crawler, the Alpha, stepped out from the smoke. Its eyes burned red, its body covered in metal-like skin. Darren stared at it and whispered, "Well, this might be a problem." Kayla took a step forward, ready to fight, but Darren put a hand on her arm. "Let me try something first," he said, walking toward the beast. She thought he was crazy, maybe. Already tired of life, no one approached an Alpha and lived. She watched, frozen, waiting for her gift to scream louder, but it didn't. The glow stayed steady, no increase, no panic, just blue. Darren raised the rod and tapped a small button near the handle. The rod lit up with blue sparks, and strange symbols appeared across its surface. Kayla's breath caught. Those symbols weren't human. They were ancient Varellan markings. The beast paused, sniffed the air, and took one slow step forward. Darren didn't move. Then he whispered a word, not in English, not in any common tongue. Kayla's eyes widened in shock. It was a sacred Varellan phrase. Only her people knew it. Only elders spoke it during rituals. Yet here he was, a human, saying it perfectly. The Alpha stopped completely, its head lowering slightly. Then, without warning, it turned and walked away, vanishing into the thick smoke. The other crawlers followed like silent shadows. Gone in seconds, the night became quiet again, almost too quiet. Kayla stared at him, eyes no longer glowing, heart pounding like a drum. What did you just say?" she asked, stepping closer. Darren turned around slowly and smiled. "Didn't think it would work, honestly," he replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Where did you learn that?" She whispered. Darren shrugged, found some old records, translated a few phrases, picked up a few odd symbols. "You said a sacred word," she said, voice low and trembling. "Words even I don't understand." "Well," he said, "maybe. I'm more useful than I look." Kayla didn't smile. She couldn't. Her whole body shook, not from fear, but from confusion. He was human, yet spoke like a Varellan elder, held a weapon marked with her people's sacred script, controlled a beast that should have killed them both. Nothing made sense anymore, and worst of all, her eyes didn't warn her at all. They didn't glow when she approached him. They didn't scream when he used ancient language. They didn't flash when he faced the Alpha. What if her eyes weren't broken? What if they were right, and he truly wasn't dangerous? Maybe, just maybe, he was something else entirely. The fire was small, barely enough to warm their hands. Kayla sat on one side, legs crossed, eyes watching the flames dance. Darren sat across from her, silent, tired, and bruised. The night around them was still too still, like the world was holding its breath. She hadn't spoken much since the crawlers left. Her mind was full of questions. Why did the Alpha crawler leave when Darren spoke those ancient words? How did a human know Virellan symbols? And most of all, why didn't her eyes glow near him? He leaned back and winced, touching the cut on his side. Kayla stood and walked around the fire. Slowly, carefully, she crouched beside him and pulled out a small silver vial from her belt. "This will help," she said softly. Unscrewing the cap, Darren looked at it and chuckled. "Alien medicine? I'm not sure if it'll like me." She didn't laugh. Just poured a few drops on the wound. It hissed like acid meeting metal, and he groaned in pain. "It means it's working," she said, not looking at his face. He nodded and leaned forward, breathing hard. "Thanks," he whispered. "You didn't have to." Kayla didn't answer. Just dipped her fingers into the last drop and touched the deeper cut on his arm. The moment her skin touched his, something strange happened. Her eyes, normally glowing danger approached, suddenly turned pure white, not pale, not dim, but completely white, like two cold moons. Darren noticed it first, staring into her eyes with surprise. "Your eyes." "They changed," he said, almost in awe. Kayla pulled her hand back quickly, like she had touched fire. She stood up, stumbling backward, heart racing in her chest. She had never seen this before. No Virellan ever told of white eyes, only blue for danger, red for fury, and black for death, but white, that was unknown. He stood slowly, still bleeding but more focused on her now. "What does white mean?" he asked gently. Kayla shook her head, breath shaky, voice unsure. "I don't know," she said. "It's never happened before." She turned away from him, trying to control her breathing. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from something else. When his skin touched hers, she didn't feel fear. She felt pulled, like something inside her shifted, unlocked. Darren sat down again, staring into the fire. "If you don't know what it means," he said slowly, "then maybe we should find out together." She didn't answer. How could she trust this feeling? Everything in her training told her to run, and yet her legs wouldn't move that night. She didn't sleep. She watched him breathe slowly, curled up beside the weak fire. His face was calm, even in rest. No glow came to her eyes, no danger, no alerts, just silence. And her eyes remained white. Until sunrise, the next day. The wind was harsh and dry. Kayla walked ahead, not speaking, trying to ignore the strange warmth still on her fingertips. Darren followed, limping slightly, but still carrying that same metal rod with glowing symbols. They traveled toward the edge of the ruined fields, toward the deep valleys where no maps reached. Kayla didn't know why she kept going with him. She only knew that whatever had changed inside her, she couldn't run from it anymore. At midday, they rested near a fallen transport ship, its metal bones picked clean by time and scavengers. Kayla wandered inside, scanning for useful parts, while Darren sat nearby, tinkering with a broken drone. She touched an old control panel, and suddenly, her eyes began to glow, not blue, not white, but flickering between the two. She turned and looked at Darren, who was holding a cracked screen, covered in Virellan text. He didn't even realize what he was holding. To him, it was junk, but to her, it was sacred data from before the fall. "You found that where?" she asked, walking fast toward him. "In the cockpit," he replied. "Figured you'd understand it better than I would." She took it, hands shaking. The writing was old, but she could still read the header. Genetic code, Experiment 217H, and below it an image of a human child. With glowing white eyes, her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, then at Darren, who was now looking at her with concern. "What is it?" he asked. Kayla opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She just looked at him, her own eyes still white. She had found the answer, or maybe just the beginning of one. He wasn't just any human. He was connected to something old, something buried. Something even her people had tried to forget for the first time. Kayla didn't know if her eyes were warning her or trying to show her something greater. The wind was sharp as blades when Kayla stepped out of the wreckage. She didn't speak. Not even when Darren called after her. She just kept walking, her boots crunching over broken glass and sand-covered metal. In her hands, she still held the old Varellan screen, its symbols glowing faintly with every step. Behind her, Darren followed, confused but silent, giving her space she needed to breathe. The image of the human child with white eyes burned in her mind. It was not just similar to Darren, it looked like him, younger, but clearly him. The file said Experiment 217H. It was a name, or maybe a label, and that scared her more than any beast they had faced. When they finally stopped near a rock ridge, Darren sat down and looked at her with tired eyes. "Are you going to tell me what that screen said?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, really looked. His hair was dust-covered, his hands cut and scraped, and yet he looked human, normal. But she knew better now. She walked over to him, pulled out a sharp blade, and without warning, sliced a small line across his arm. He gasped, pulling back. "What the hell?" "Don't move," she said firmly, catching the blood on her fingers. She looked at it, red and warm, like any other blood, but not quite. There was a faint shimmer to it, like silver light trapped inside. And then she did something she didn't understand. She pressed his blood against her own skin. The reaction was instant. Her body locked in place, muscles tightening like stone. Her eyes flared bright white, and her knees buckled. She fell to the ground, trembling, unable to speak. Visions exploded behind her eyes, images of stars, of ancient cities, of her people running, falling, disappearing, and always a figure, human-shaped, walking through the chaos untouched. Darren rushed to her side, grabbing her shoulders. "What's happening?" "Kayla, talk to me." She couldn't. Her voice was caught in her chest. Her heart pounded like thunder. Her skin burned like fire. And then, just as fast as it started, it stopped. She gasped, breathing like she'd been underwater for hours. And when she looked up at him, her eyes were no longer white or blue, they were golden. He backed away, a little, shocked. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, unsure. She sat up slowly, placing her hand on the ground to steady herself. "You didn't hurt me," she said softly. "You activated something." He frowned, wiping blood from his arm. "I don't understand what's going on," she nodded, eyes still glowing gold. "Neither do I," she whispered. "But your blood, it remembers." "Remembers what?" "The old world," she said. "The fall of my people, the war, the betrayal." Darren shook his head, confused and scared. "I was just a baby when I arrived on this planet. I have no memory of anything." Kayla stood slowly, brushing off dirt from her legs. "You may not remember, but your blood does." She handed him the old screen again, her fingers still shaking. "This doesn't just say you're part of an experiment," she said. "It says your DNA holds locked instructions." "Instructions for what?" She looked at the sky, where stars were just beginning to appear. "For controlling us." He took a step back, his face pale. "I didn't ask for this," he said. "I know," she replied. "But it doesn't matter now. Your blood and mine, they weren't meant to mix. Yet they did. And now something is changing inside me." She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling the strange warmth that hadn't faded since the contact. "I feel like I've been rewritten." Darren didn't know what to say. He sat down, face in his hands. "So what now?" he asked quietly. Kayla looked at him, her golden eyes calm, no longer flashing with fear. "Now, we find the rest of the files," she said, "and we find out who made you and why." She began walking toward the edge of the ridge where the land dropped into old tunnels. Below were ruins older than the war, older than the colonies, and maybe the answers. Darren followed. Slowly, every step heavier than the last. Something was awakening in both of them, and it had only just begun. Kayla had never walked so close to anyone before. Even when danger passed, even when battles ended, she always moved alone. But now her footsteps stayed near Darren's, sometimes just inches apart. She told herself it was strategy. He had the map, he had the tech, but the truth whispered louder with every step. Something in her was changing. The caves they entered were deep, older than both their species' memories. The air inside was thick with silence, as if time itself had stopped. Breathing here, glowing moss lined the stone walls, casting soft green light on their faces. Darren moved slowly, careful where he stepped. Kayla followed without speaking, her golden eyes scanning the shadows. Every now and then, her hand would drift toward his shoulder, not to stop him, just to feel that he was still real. She hated the feeling, hated how her instincts told her to run, but her heart told her to stay. Virellans were programmed to survive, to run when the threat was unknown. But now, even as something ancient stirred beneath their feet, she didn't want to run. She wanted to stay next to him. Darren stopped at a metal door sealed with rust and old symbols. He brushed dust away and pointed to the carvings. "Same writing as before," he said. "I think this place was built by whoever made that experiment." Kayla touched the surface gently, the symbols pulsing beneath her fingers. Suddenly, the door responded. It unlocked without a sound, sliding open like it had been waiting just for her. They stepped into the room, and cold light lit up on its own. Strange glass tubes lined the walls, filled with frozen air and floating shapes. Darren walked to one and stared in shock. Inside was a child, part human, part something else, sleeping, unmoving, untouched by time. "They were making more like me," he said quietly. "Maybe I wasn't the only one." Kayla didn't answer. Her hand rested on his arm again. He turned to her, surprised at her touch. She didn't let go. "Not this time. You're scared," he said softly. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." And it was true. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what was coming. She was afraid of what it meant to let go of him. The machines in the room began to flicker, sensors lighting up as they registered their presence. A warning blinked on the screen. "Integration process incomplete." Darren backed away, his voice tense. "We should leave now." But Kayla didn't move. Instead, she reached out and pulled him closer, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Her kind didn't believe in bonding, not emotionally, not physically. But her body pressed against his like it had always belonged there. Her heartbeat matched his, calm and slow. And in that moment, her golden eyes dimmed into a soft white glow. Not from danger, but from something else, something she didn't have a name for. Darren looked at her, unsure what to say. He had spent his whole life alone, just like her. But this quiet closeness, it felt like the missing piece neither of them knew they were searching for. He raised his hand, touched her cheek, and her eyes shimmered again. No blue, no red, no black, just white and warm. A loud crack echoed through the walls. Something deep below had shifted. The ground rumbled slightly, and the lights above flickered. Darren stepped back, scanning the walls. "We triggered something," he said. "Something big." But Kayla didn't run. She stood between him and the shadows, blade drawn, heart steady. She was programmed to flee. But now she would fight for him, above them. A siren began to whine in a language even Kayla couldn't read. The screen flashed again. Phase 2 engaged. And below their feet, machines began to wake. Kayla took his hand, her voice quiet but full of meaning. "We go together now," she said. Darren nodded, squeezing her fingers gently. "No more alone," he replied, and together they stepped deeper into the unknown. Not just two beings from different worlds, but something new, something even the creators hadn't planned. A cold wind swept across the rocky cliff as Kayla stood at the edge, staring into the clouds far below. Her body was still, but her mind raced with noise. The message had come. Through an old Varellan beacon, hidden deep inside the tunnel wall. It activated only when her hand touched it, as if waiting all these years for her. Static first, then symbols, then voices, old and powerful ones. Voices from the council. They didn't ask how she was. They didn't care where she had been. They only spoke one warning, repeated 3 times. Stay away from the human. She had listened in silence. Their words were not suggestions. They were commands. The council never used fear in their voices, not unless they meant it. They called him dangerous, unnatural, a remnant of a failed experiment meant to be buried and forgotten. They told her the white in her eyes was not a gift, but a signal in infection. They told her if she didn't leave him, she would change into something that was no longer Varellan. But Kayla didn't respond to them. She turned off the beacon and walked away, heart heavy, but her feet sure. Behind her, Darren sat by the fire, adjusting the last energy cell into his old rod. His face lit up with warmth when she returned, but her own face stayed cold, unsure, unreadable. You were gone a while, he said, standing up. She nodded slowly, choosing her words carefully. I received a message. From who? My people, she said, voice almost a whisper. They want me to leave you. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her, really looked, like someone staring at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to step or turn back. And what do you want? He asked finally. She took a long breath, her fingers twitching at her sides. I don't know anymore. Everything inside her was breaking old rules. Varellans did not disobey the council. They were raised to follow order, to avoid risk, to protect their bloodline. But her blood was not just hers anymore. His had touched it, changed it, whispered secrets it was never meant to hold. He sat back down, the fire crackling between them. I don't blame you if you walk away, he said. I wouldn't want anyone to be hunted because of me. She sat across from him, closer than she meant to. If I walk away now, she said softly, I will never forgive myself. They were quiet for a long time. The stars above them blinked through thin clouds, watching silently. Then Darren reached into his bag and pulled out the broken screen from the ruins. I fixed part of it, he said. There's more data now. Kayla leaned in, heart pounding. The screen flickered, showing a series of video files, blurred and damaged. One file played on its own an old lab, with scientists moving around a young boy, asleep in a chamber. It was Darren, no question. But what made her chest tighten was the writing on the wall behind him. Hybrid key. Phase 3. And under it symbols of both human and Varellan design. Locked together, she pulled back, breath shallow. They made you as a weapon, she whispered. Darren looked at her with steady eyes. And maybe I don't want to be. Another file opened, this one showing a much younger Kayla. Standing in front of the council, she was just a child, barely able to speak. Subject X11 shows reaction to blue phase stimuli, said the voice in the recording. Connection with hybrid key still unknown. Kayla froze, her mouth dry. I was part of this, she whispered. Darren looked at her in shock. They knew we'd meet, she said. They planned this. Her whole life had been shaped by fear and warning. But what if all of it had been designed? What if her gift, her instincts, even her glowing eyes were all tools built for this very moment? A deep rumble echoed through the valley as an approaching ship broke through the clouds. Its design was unmistakable Varellan war class, sent only for capture or destruction. Kayla stood, pulling her blade free. They're coming, she said. For you. And maybe for me. Darren stood beside her, weapon in hand, no fear in his eyes. I'm done running, he said. She looked at him one last time before the sky turned red from the ship's light. And for the first time, she didn't need her eyes to glow to know one thing clearly. She would rather fight beside him than obey those who only saw her as a piece on a board. The ground shook beneath their feet as the war-class Varellan ship lowered through the clouds. Its engines growled like angry gods, stirring the dust into violent spirals. Kayla narrowed her glowing eyes as the first shadow dropped from the sky. A soldier, tall and armored in the black crest of the council. And then another and another, until a full squad stood before them in a half-circle. Blasters ready, voices cold. "Step away from the human," the leader barked, his voice echoing through the stone cliffs. Kayla didn't move. She stood between Darren and the soldiers, blade in hand, eyes now glowing brighter than ever before. The white in her irises swirled with a soft gold, alive and pulsing. She had never felt this kind of power. It didn't hurt. It didn't burn. It simply filled her with clarity. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of death. The lead soldier stepped forward, lowering his helmet. "Kayla of the Blue Line," he said. "You are called to obey. You were made to obey." She stared at him, unmoving. "I was made to survive," she replied. "Not to kneel." Behind her, Darren readied the ancient rod, symbols glowing brightly now. It pulsed in sync with her eyes. The connection between them was no longer hidden, no longer a mystery. It was truth. They had been designed apart, but destined to meet. Two halves of an unknown key. The soldier raised his arm to fire. Kayla acted without thinking. She moved like lightning, blade cutting the air in a clean arc. His weapon flew from his hand before he could blink. The others raised their rifles, but none fired, not yet. They were confused by her speed, her glow, her defiance. "She is compromised," one of them whispered. "She is becoming the third signal," another said. Kayla's heart raced at those words. Third signal. Not blue for danger, not white for transformation. Then what? She looked at Darren, who stared back at her like he'd known all along. Not with knowledge, but with instinct. Somehow the final key was not just in her or him. It was in the bond they now shared. One soldier finally pulled the trigger, but the moment the shot flew, Kayla's eyes erupted into a brilliant, blinding silver. The light exploded around them like a shield, shattering the plasma blast mid-air. The ground cracked from the force, and all the soldiers stumbled back, shielding their eyes. Darren ran to her side as she dropped to one knee, the power in her body surging out in waves. Her skin shimmered like starlight. "Kayla!" he shouted, grabbing her shoulders. She looked up, eyes dimming, but a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I know what I am now," she said. The soldiers didn't move, stunned into silence. The leader lowered his rifle and stepped back. "She is no longer Varellan," he said with disbelief. "She has become something else." "No," Kayla whispered, standing with Darren's help. "I have become what you were too afraid to let exist. A Varellan with choice." The ship above began to ascend again. The soldiers recalled one by one. No battle was ordered. No last attack given. They knew they had already lost, not to a weapon, but to a will they couldn't break. When the last shadow disappeared into the sky, Kayla turned to Darren, exhausted but alive. He reached out, brushing her cheek gently. "You did it," he said. "You scared them." She leaned into his touch, eyes soft and glowing faintly. "We did it," she replied. Together, they stood there in the fading light, silence wrapping around them like a warm cloak. The old world had tried to shape them, control them, break them, but it failed. Because something stronger had taken root between them. Not just survival, not just power, but love, real, wild, dangerous love. And Kayla's eyes, once just a warning of doom, now shimmered with life. Not because danger was near, but because she had finally found what was worth glowing for.